Welcome everyone, my name is Jake Monroe. I'm a soil management specialist for field crops with OMAFRA. And on behalf of the OMAFRA soil team, welcome to this series of events. This is our first of 3 nights talking in depth about strip till and different aspects of strip till. So if you're interested in timing and tools, tonight's the night. We've got 4 farmer speakers who are going to be talking to you about their operations. And we're excited to bring this event to you. So just a little bit off the top. So the purpose, and just a reminder for anyone who's just joined, if you could please press the mute button just to make sure there's no background noise. So the purpose here is to share information, hear from some experienced strip till farmers, and really get some discussion going. And so you'll see in the second half of the event this evening, we're going to have a chance for a Q&A and a moderated panel. So that's really what we want to give you a flavor of these 4 growers, what they're doing on their farms, and then give you an opportunity to ask questions. So again, just a bit of housekeeping off the start. If you're a general participant, please mute yourself and keep your camera off for the duration of the evening. My colleague Ben Rosser, our corn specialist, is going to be the moderator for the question and answer period. So as you're hearing the presenters give their talks in the first half, as you have questions, please feel free to direct message or directly in the chat, send Ben your questions. You can also send questions to everybody in the chat. That's welcome as well. If you're having any technical issues at all, issues with accessing audio or issues seeing the screen, please let Anne Verhollen know. She's going to help you out with that side of things. And we've also got some other soil team members helping to provide support in the background. So with that, I'll just give you a little bit of an overview of what we're going to be covering over the course of the next hour or so. So we've done the intro and welcome part. You're going to hear from 4 speakers. You see their names there on the screen: Gary De Borger, Ken Lawton, Ken Nixon, and Peter Postl. They're each going to give you short presentations about the topic of the night, and then you're going to get a chance to pose your questions, have a panel discussion. As mentioned in the promo for these events, we're going to share a little bit of a new strip till series that's coming from Farm and Food Care. So close to 8 o'clock, we're going to end the formal portion of the evening with a little promotional video for that series that's just about to be released. And then from 8 to 8:30, the formal part of the evening will be done, but there's going to be an optional period where 4 speakers have agreed to stay on a little longer and take part in an extended Q&A session. So that's the overview of the evening. With that, I'd like to hand it over to I see someone's find the annotate function. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Gary to kick us off and to start into his presentation. So Gary, if you could turn your video and audio on, I'll turn to your first slide.
Okay, I guess I'm gonna go here. Farm in North Lambton in the Warwick forest area, strictly cash crop, corn, soybeans, and wheat. We've been messing around with strip till for probably 10 years, having guys come in and do some check areas and did yields versus our conventional system, which was plow and 2 passes in the spring with a cultivator. Our predominant soils are Perth and Brookston clay loam with a little bit of Fox sand and some Brisbane sand loams as well. So kind of, but predominantly Perth and Brookston. Okay, yeah, this is probably our old system. When we were running the plows, we have three of these going, and then move along to my next tool here. I think keep the slides going, I guess, and stay ahead of the planters. Today we would probably need 3 of these to stay ahead of the planters. So, and including the tractors. So our strip till system that we've been at it for, bought our own unit about 7 years ago, And we started with the coulter unit. If you want to move the slides up ahead. Started with this unit here, 16 row coulter unit, and played around with it for a bunch of years and really weren't happy with the job that we were getting on it. Obviously you can see we're moving quite a bit of residue here. That's pretty common, but it breaks down in the middle. It appears like it's doing a nice strip here. So if we move on, okay, and there again, that's done in some fox sand loam. When we first got the unit, looks like a really nice strip. So what we're looking for is a berm and you know, residue cleared zone. Now move to the next one. And here's the problem we were having with that unit. You see the soil that's over to the right side. So it basically would pick the soil profile up and move it over 3 inches. So now the 3-inch part up here would end up in the spring, would be a bump. And as the soil settled at the 6-inch mark, it would be depressed. So we struggled with that, try to fix it, talk to the manufacturer about it, and after 3 years, we just give up on it. And it was doing in all our soil types, and so that was one of the reasons we switched to a shank machine, because we just could not get a berm that we were happy with. Very important to have your soil centered over top of the area in the middle, and not moved over onto a hard pan or whatever on the side. That was fox sand loam, but quite dry, very hard and dry at that point when we did that. You move ahead with the slide there. And this is our current unit, pretty complex unit, large row cleaners. So they travel at a slower speed than a smaller, like conventional row cleaner that you would see on a planter these days. So so it doesn't push the residue over onto your other pass or whatever. Depth band, and then a shank in between. Further back there's a shank, and the blowout coulters are probably what makes this unit what we really liked about this unit. It stops any soil from blowing out from the shank. And then the next set of coulters just kind of berms them up. And the baskets at the back, run them very light. Just, we don't want to push that berm back down. We just want to more or less kind of contain it and just kind of touch it, tap it, you know, break it. Any large lumps, which we're not too worried about lumps in the zone, they'll break down over the winter. And we strictly run this in the fall. When we were running the Pluribus, we were running a 2-pass system. Put P's and K's down in the fall, and then ran a starter in the spring. And we struggled with the spring pass, and eventually gave up on the spring pass, and so we were down to a 1-pass system, where we come in PK in the fall, a little bit of sulfur, and then come in with a planter with 20 gallons of 28, and use a 2x2x2 system where we put nitrogen on either side of the row. And as far in our soils, that's the way to work. The ground is so mellow when you're planting into that zone. We also had row cleaners on the planter, so we kind of more or less just give it a light brush, clean any residue off that could have gone on the berm in the wintertime. I think we got some more. Do we have any more clips here? There we go. And that's the current unit working right here, moving all the residue over and end up with a nice contained berm, you know, raised up about 3 or 4 inches, and by spring that'd be settled down to, just a ½ inch berm or 1 inch berm, and the planter follows that. We run both beacons on the tractor and the unit, and that keeps our unit straight and guess rows, at that 30-inch mark like we like to see. Pull a 9-ton Montag cart and 12 rows to pull 12-row shank machine 5 inches in our soils. You probably need something about that 375 horse tractor to pull it. We're about 395 on the unit that we're using on this strip tiller, and it seems to work pretty good. And there's what a strip looks like behind this unit. And when you dig in there, you've got a nice 5-inch strip that's and all the soil is contained right over the center. Anytime you see a blowout of any soil, wherever that soil came from ends up to be a hole within your strip. And this particular unit seems to do a really good job of preventing any blowout of soil. Keeps it well contained. And and this is back to our other unit and some of the difficulties we were having. This is a very shallow, what we thought we needed as far as like in a coulter unit to warm up, or warm up the soil in the spring and then plant it. It just ended up with nothing but lumps, and made a very poor seed bed. As far as, we only tried that for 2 years, and finally said, no, that it's best to just make the strip in the fall, leave it alone, and plant into it. Make some much more uniform planting conditions than coming in with a unit like this in the spring and trying to make lumps is basically all we were doing. There, like that. Planter's got to try to plant in that. It would, by the time the planter went over that, it would break it down quite a bit. Like there were fairly mellow lumps by the time you hit them, but still, no, it still was not a seed bed that we're not a seed bed that we're getting right now with like a spring pass with the planter, and that's it. So there again is showing in the spring how it's moving it over to one side and leave it convex on the other side. It was kind of frustrating working with that unit, and that's again a spring warm-up pass or starter pass, and just not at all what you want to see. Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much, Gary. Now we'll move on to Ken.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ken Lawton from Kent Bridge area. I farm with my son Ian, my cousin Stan, and his son Alex. And we're in our 3rd year of strip tillage with cover crops. Grow corn, seed corn, soybeans, white beans, and wheat. Mostly on silt loam, but we also have one farm of really sticky black clay as well. Next slide, please. Oh, something's mixing. Next slide. There. We purchased an 8-row Kuhn Gladiator strip tiller. It's a shank type machine with 2 4.5-ton variable rate bins. Next slide. One of the best things about it is all the adjustments, or the main adjustments, are tool free. So everything is just move a lever and adjust quite nice. We like the texture that the chain baskets leave on the back, a lot similar to our triple K cultivator we used to use. The downside is the chains don't seem to last that long. We get 1.5 years or so out of them. Next slide. The first year we did fall strips and spring strips. We would do 2 fertilizer products in the fall and 2 more in the spring. And we did this mainly to, for a safety factor, because by then the strips felt like the S-tine cultivator would leave, and made nice, ends up with a nice strip either way. Next slide, please. And this is planting in the spring. You can see all the lumps are kind of crushed down. Everything worked down nice. The row cleaners on the on the planters only had to groom down minimal lumps. There wasn't a lot of stuff to move, but they just help work a proper seed bed. Next slide. Okay. Oh, I guess there's a video that doesn't work there, but it showed the planter working 2 years ago on kind of damp strips with, you could see mud sticking on the gauge wheels, but it still made a really good strip to plant on, even though it was kind of damp. This strip here, or picture here, is after seed corn in October. We broadcast cover crops in 1st of August, I think, and it's mostly radish that you're looking at there. And you can see the pass to the right side of the machine was done in wetter conditions a week earlier. So we left and came back the day of this picture, and you can see it's making a nice slide there, or a nice strip there. After finding the first fall challenging to get good conditions for all of our acres, we left some soybean acres to be no-tilled to just free up time for the strip. We started applying our bean fertility in the corn, the option of not doing any strip tilling if the weather and time didn't permit. And that practice also saved on costs like the chain baskets and points. Next slide, please. To run the machine in clay, we were advised to swap out the shank for a pair of coulters, as the shank would kind of smear the clay in the seed trench area. So we bought another another set of shanks and mounted yet a coulter pair to each one. After another grower showed us what he had built, and we did pretty much the same deal, and it worked nice. We had used that for even on the silt in the spring. We used that for a year and a half. Last year was kind of wet to finish the season, so we put the shanks back in, and that just turned over the ground that was a little bit cheesy and made a nicer seed bed. Next slide, please. This is photos in summer on the sticky black clay that I spoke of. The wheat sod is really tough and hard to turn over, so you don't get a very wide strip out of it. And this is actually the best strip tilling we've had on that black clay, but we will go over it again with the coulters in the spring, and it should make a nicer seed bed, at least nice for clay. Next slide, please. Here we are in December on frozen ground making strips, and they also came out okay, even with the frozen radish to bounce over here and there. So the machine does work well in frozen ground. I was surprised at how long we could keep going and how deep the frost it would go, but you don't want to break things either. Next slide, please. See, most of the time we run the coulters in the spring ahead of the planter. This is after when it was kind of damp there, as I spoke of before, but you can see it's still making a nice seed bed. So it's nice to have the choice to change shanks or coulters whenever you need to. Next slide, please. And we soon realized the value of the flexibility of this this machine to switch the tooling around or to adjust the coulters kind of like on the go, so you can make it work in pretty much any weather. And those are pretty nice strips that we did this November. And next slide, please. Currently, we have a very nice interseeded cover crop, and we didn't really want to mix, kill that off yet. So to maximize the cover growth, and that, in the spring, we'll be doing a one trip pass with 4 fertilizer products. It'll have to be custom blended into the 2-bin variable rates, but my fertilizer guy says that won't be too hard to do. And another goal that we have here is to plant as close as we can to the old corn row for controlled traffic, and try and build on the soil tilth and soil health that we have in the strip. And in seed corn stubble, we're able to go right on top of the old row exactly. But we'll find out this spring. I'm hoping to go 3 inches to the side of the old grain corn row. And well, I think that's my time should be up, so I hope you enjoyed the pictures.
Thanks very much, Ken. And next up, we've got Ken Nixon.
Can everyone hear me?
Loud and clear.
Okay. So next slide, please, Jake. Anyhow, yeah, I just threw my phone number up there if you want to jot it down. If you want to call me after this is over, that's fine. I'll try to walk you through something or walk you away from the edge. Next slide, please. So we're at Ilderton, halfway between Ilderton and Narva, a mile and a half north of the city of London. And basically with our back to the city, we farm in about a 10-mile radius in 3 directions. And we're basically on predominantly silt loam soils with fairly complex topographies. We're not on this nice tabletop stuff, with a brick under one corner. So we do have water gather and run, and that's part of the reason why we kind of adopted no-till and covers and all this sort of stuff. And we're on mostly systematically drained ground. And we're very fastidious about trying to maintain a three crop rotation of corn, soys, and wheat, and we try not to deviate off that at all, if at all possible. Next slide, please. So that's our rig. Basically, we've been running strips now since 2007. That's a 55 cat tractor, 225 crank horse. So it's not a real big power plant. That is a semi-mount bar. So basically we're on RTK, so we don't really need implement guidance on that rig, because essentially wherever the tractor goes, that's where the bar goes. And it's worked out fairly well for us. And that cart is actually, the bottom end of it is a Montag, so that's a 6-ton Montag unit as far as fertilizer delivery, and the whole works has served us fairly well. Next slide, please. Just want to show you some of the strips this thing's capable of making. So we're fairly happy with that strip. I know Gary wasn't real happy with the Dawn unit. We've done some tweaking and it's acceptable. That looks wet. What it is, I think that was a really frosty morning in September one day, and so that's why things are a little bit sticky on top, but essentially the dirt's dry. Next slide, please. This is another shot. This is in about knee-high oats, probably mid-September one year, and it's capable of making a pretty nice strip in that as well. So when foliage gets big, though, foliage needs to be dry. That's the one thing that we have learned. Next slide, please. So don't mean to rehash anything that anybody already knows, but the question a lot of people ask themselves when they're either trying to enter or maybe even move within this market is, is it a shank or a coulter? So those are your shank machines, those are your coulter machines by and large, and I know there's some that are interchangeable. as Ken has shown, and you know, I think Northman has the ability to go from shank to coulters. By and large, the shank will make a taller and narrower berm. That's not perfect, but by and large, that's our experience. We started with a shank machine and moved to a coulter machine. But I will say, tall berms. So Gary was talking about a berm that, you know, maybe was 3 or 4 inches high in the fall, but settled down to that maybe nice 1/2 to an inch. And even still, that can be a little bit hard to keep a planter centered on. So when we moved to a coulter, the one thing we found is it made a wider and flatter berm. So the downside is it doesn't shed water. The residue may kind of fall in on it, but the planter, our experience is the planter stays centered in it much better. The one thing so moving down as far as the shank, I find that a fall only tool unless you're maybe on some sandy soils. And that's part of the reason we moved to the coulter was we do a fair bit of work of our own, then some custom work, custom strip till. And so we've got about at least 20 working days usually ahead of us in the fall. And so we've had some situations where the weather just closes in on us and we need a plan B. And so we're on a soil that we cannot run a coulter on a shank on in the spring. And so basically the coulter machine, as imperfect as it can be, does give us a plan B. So the other thing too is I'm going to say a coulter machine will cost you more up front in general as far as capital cost, and it'll cost you more to operate. And the one other thing, a coulter machine, so those are sort of the downsides of a coulter machine. The one upside is if you're on stony ground, a coulter machine won't roll up stones like shank will. So I have some friends in the Thumb of Michigan, and while they curse their coulter machine, they're on horribly stony ground, and basically they don't roll it up. So that's the one reason they stick with it. So the litmus test, I guess, is, you know, would you confidently plow or chisel or deep disc your ground in the spring? And if you say, yeah, we can do that, we're either on a sand or sandy loam or whatever, and yeah, we do that all the time, or we got a nice loam over gravel, you know, river bottom or something like that, you know, we do that all the time, well, then maybe you can run a shank in the spring. And if you are in the hell no way will we spring plow camp, well, then you don't want to see a shank at all in the spring. Next slide, please. The other question that we're all looking at too maybe is, you know, is it fall or spring? And all I'm going to say is a strip till unit is a dry soil tool. So use it when the soil is dry enough to work or shatter, you know, that 4 to 6 inches deep. And so in fall, you know, generally we have, or I should say late summer, that August, September, generally we have dry soil and plentiful fertilizer infrastructure if you're applying fertilizer. So, but the spring, the nice thing about spring is it gives you more options with nitrogen and sulfur. So in our case, we prefer fall, that window between wheat harvest and soybean harvest, because it gives us the greatest likelihood of dry soil by time availability. And that's why we prefer our fall strip. We're also putting down on our own dirt 200 pounds of potash and 200 pounds of MAP in the strip, which basically is about 1/3 of our fertilizer budget or half of our 3-year fertilizer budget. Next slide, please. So what have we changed? We're a shank machine. We're now coulter. As I said before, it gives us the versatility of a plan B for the spring. We also have done a little bit of spring strip work for dry beans or corn on corn. It's not a program that I guess I recommend. The corn on corn works better than dry beans in corn stalks. The other thing we've changed is, and a couple of guys have alluded to this, we used to move our corn rows back and forth 15 inches. You know, with the RTK, you can shift to try to prevent the whole fertilizer stratification thing. But what it effectively did is we kept moving our corn rows into our tire tracks for the last 3 years. So we made this switch a few years ago. We just leave our corn rows exactly where they were every 3rd year, and kind of kind of closer to controlled traffic, and as of yet, we have not seen any, stripes, kind of the corn row syndrome stripes in our soybeans, which are solid seeded, or our wheat. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. There we are. So just perspectives and lessons. Our lesson, or the thing I'd impart on you, is earlier is better, especially when you're speaking to fall strips. It gives you a bigger window of dry soil. Our experience also is you want to be working in smaller covers and small volunteers. They're a lot less problematic. That knee-high oats I showed you, I mean, it looked nice, but it was a pig. And if it was wet or dewy in the morning and it produced the number of hours you could run. You do not want to let red clover get too big on you. Red clover is fine as a cover in this system. Just make sure you're in early when it's small. As far as fertility, strips don't mean you can save fertilizer. Don't sell yourself on, or don't buy the thing on the fact that it's going to save you money. And on fertilizer, it's removal, and we're still doing that. And don't necessarily have to have a fertilizer bin. If you got good fertility, or you want to broadcast, or you've still got boxes on your platter, that's fine. Just make the strip and work with that. And the last thing I'd like to say is light tillage before strips. Resist the urge of the temptation to BT ahead of your strip. And I'll shut it down and leave the rest for questions. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Ken. And our fourth and final speaker here, Peter, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, thanks. As you can see, we farm near Brucefield, and our main soil type is Harrison silt loam, listable silt loam, and a little bit of gravel, a gravel bottom. And anyway, we sold the plow in 1988, and at that time we started no-tilling and minimum till, mainly chisel plowing and stuff. So, and then in 1997, we started experimenting with strip till, and currently we're in a 4-year rotation, and that is corn, 30-inch strip till, and the strip till in the fall. And in the spring then, another pass. So is our 30-inch twin rows. They're no-tilled in between the corn stalks. Then we follow with 30-inch twin, like white beans in 30-inch twin, and there's spring strip, like we plant cereal rye after the soybeans. And and we just plant into, like we spray off the cereal rye and then plant into that in the spring. And then we no-till our wheat then after the white beans. So yeah, there you can see our current setup. I guess it's been called a Franken machine by some people, but anyway, we keep playing around, and I keep spending my winters in the shop, I guess, to create some of these things. So 10 years ago, we bought the 6 soil units, and then when we went in 2015, so 5 years later, we wanted to go to 12 rows. We bought 12 pluribus units, but we were not happy with those either, and so then we traded we traded the pluribus units in for the Terraforge units, similar to what Gary was showing you before. So we did that in 2018, and if you want to go to the next picture. So we're actually quite happy with the shank units. We're really happy with the soil borer units. Next.
One more, Peter.
Yeah, no, another picture, the one with the shank. That's the one. So anyway, the reason we bought not 6 more soil borer units is, like, with our FlexiQuil cart, that would not be heavy enough and wouldn't be able to handle 12 soil borer units. So we have to come up with something different, and that's why we tried different stuff. So, but anyway, I'm actually really happy with the shank units. Because we actually, Harrison silt loam is quite stony. So, but anyway, you don't bring up that much, I guess. So, and we even run it in the spring. I mean, we could put a double coulter system in the spring, but we have one. We tried that. So, but we run the shank fairly shallow, and actually I'm quite pleased with that. So the only problem was if depending on the spring a little bit, and if it's a wet spring, we have to run really shallow. And then one year we did have seed burn from the root burn from the fertilizer. So we ended up, we split the fertilizer now, and you can see that, I'm not sure if you can see it, that little white tube actually drops half the fertilizer in front of the shank now, and the other half goes, at the bottom of the shank. So, and that seems to have eliminated that problem. So, and next slide, please. So, our double coulter, like the Soil Warrior, is just the basic 2 coulter setup. Now we did change, like the one is a 2-inch 8-wave, which is their standard coulter. And we took one out, and we got a 1.5-inch wide, but 18-wave vortex kind of curved waves, I guess, if you will. So, and yeah, we've been using that for many years like that. So as you can see in that picture, it's kind of hard to see, but this was done just the last 2 days in the fall, very late. Usually we strip till end of August. Actually, we plant the twin-row cover crop. That's obviously, and then we strip till a few days later, so before even the cover crop comes up. But this year I didn't get that done, and we had to do it late. So, and as you can see, I'm not very happy with that seed bed, what the shanks did. And I know it's maybe a little bit hard to see, but the Soil Warrior, is a lot more forgiving, especially if it gets damp, and those 2 coulters, do a good job of making a nice seed bed. So the only thing is a Soil Warrior does offer a 3rd coulter option, but they take out the depth gauging wheel, and I don't like that. So I'm hoping to make, this winter to kind of leave that wheel or move that ahead and put that 3rd coulter in between, and that'll maybe make it a little bit nicer in the spring. We may take that 2-inch coulter off then, because it, 2-inch 8 waves is actually, can make things pretty chunky. So I would probably want to go with a 13 wave or maybe another 18 wave to make that work. So yeah, so but we'll see if we can get around to that in the winter time. So next slide. Yeah, a lot of people always, a lot of questions I get, and a lot of concerns people have with erosion, I guess. And when you see that slope there, that's actually a 5% slope, which means about 35-foot drop and over 700 feet. So, and we have a few of those. And over the years, we have learned to deal with that, I guess. We have very, very little erosion. And the main thing is to, don't make it too fine. Notice that we don't run a rolling basket on the back of our shank units or the Soil Warrior. And the other thing is that the berm building coulters don't leave a little bit of groove or go into the ground too much, because that's where it starts washing. So that's, we've eliminated that, or make sure we don't have that, I guess. And the other big thing that helps with erosion, like you saw in the previous picture, the cover crop, right, that's planted there. So, and like I said, we plant it late August, beginning September usually, and because we spray first because of perennial weed control, and then we leave it growing. So we have green stuff all winter, right, and we just spray that off before we plant in the spring. So but anyway, the main thing is, yeah, that cover crop and just make that berm not too fine, and that really helps with erosion. So yeah, with that, I guess I think I'll end my presentation, and if there's any questions, I'm glad to answer those. So.
Thanks very much, Peter. So at this point, I've stopped sharing my screen, and I'd like to welcome my colleague Ben Rosser, who's our corn specialist at OMAFRA. We've got about 15, 16 minutes to have a good question and answer section. So Ben, I'll let you take it from here.
Thanks, Jake, and thanks, Gary, Ken, and Peter for the presentations. So really kind of this is the interactive part we want. If you guys have questions, there's 4 experienced strip tillers to speak to or ask questions. As Jake mentioned, we would like people to stay muted to make things easy to converse back and forth. But if you can enter a question in the chat, either publicly or if you'd like to stay anonymous, if you direct message me in the chat, so open the chat button and change who it's to myself. I can also ask those questions anonymously as well. But I have a couple questions here that came in while the presentations were going on, and I'll start with some of these ones to get going. So the first one was for Gary. Gary, a question came in, you weren't happy with some of the job that your Don Pluribus was doing. There was a question, what generation of Pluribus were you using that you weren't happy with?
Gen 4. They've got a Gen 5 now, so but yeah, I think I'm not sure about how the Gen 5 works. So I think there was an improvement based on manufacturer was, we kind of pushed them into making a change because we weren't happy with the way the Gen 4 was working. So they did build a Gen 5. So I don't know if they, got around the soil moving over to one side or not, but I don't know, we tried it in all our different soil types and it was doing the same thing in all our soils. So it's like clay, loam, fox sand or Brisbane, it was still doing that move over to the one side thing. So
great. Thanks, Gary. So another question that came in, given where each of you guys are at right now with your strip till program, what's one thing that's maybe bugging you or an issue you'd like to solve, or where would you go next to advance your system a little bit more?
I guess ourselves, we're still struggling in our wheat, and but some of the other fellows are talking about pretty hard to create a nice berm in wheat ground. I found it's not necessarily it is the wheat, but wheat is a shallow rooted, fine rooted system, and the soil doesn't want to blow apart in that type of soil. So we're still playing with wheat, not exactly happy with the job that we're getting on wheat ground. So we're cautiously working on strip tilling wheat because of that, but trying to refine it. But it's not that you'd almost think it's wet. It's really not wet. It's just a fine, shallow rooted crop that seems to bind the soil together. And like I say, it just doesn't want to blow apart when you put a strip till unit through it. Coulters, I think, did better than a shank machine, if I remember.
And Gary, when you mentioned that with the wheat, is that just like volunteer wheat in general, or more so like right behind where you're dropping chaff or dropping straw?
What we did in our wheat this year, we cut it quite tight to the ground, had red clover in it, baled the straw, and then we strip tilled last week of our first week of September, and we had volunteer wheat where we had dropped the straw, and the strip till unit had a hard time making a strip. It was just slotting because we had left the volunteer wheat get too big. So fine root system binded the soil together and wouldn't let us get a nice uniform berm or wide enough strip. It just kind of plowed through it. And so lesson learned was I did some work with a John Deere 4 nozzles like a gator, and I went through and I sprayed off those 4-foot spots where we had dropped the straw, and the volunteer wheat came and I could burn the wheat off. So I guess keep the volunteer wheat from growing before you strip till is probably the lesson. So I wanted to establish the clover, so I didn't and mow it for weed control, so we didn't want to go too early. So volunteer wheat is a struggle to strip till with a shank machine.
Thanks, Gary. Ken, and Peter, do you guys have comments on maybe where you'd go if you wanted to change something right now in your system?
Yeah, I guess I can go first here. Like I mentioned before, it's mainly maybe adding that third coulter on the soil warrior. Because the shallower you run it, I think they're about, I'm not sure how far they're apart, but if you run it really shallow in the spring, right, you're just trying to tickle the soil sometimes, then sometimes it doesn't, move that center a little bit. So just to, and then make it a little finer, to make it almost like a strip freshener almost, I guess, is the thing you want to do. So that's maybe as far as the machine themselves. The other thing is, and I'm pretty happy with the cover crops now, like just planting twin row cover crop, and then but we're just trying to do more and more with cover crops and making that work with the strip tillage is the other thing. So
Thanks, Peter. Ken, any comments on that question?
We found we were looking at getting more bite on the hilling coulters to cut that the tough sod that he was speaking of there, just to get it loose so you could roll it over.
And Ken Nixon, I don't know if you're muted still on the phone or if you can.
I am unmuted now.
Okay, we can hear you now.
So the one thing I wanted to say to Gary's point about the chaff trails is that's one of my bugaboos is if you are going to windrow straw, you must spread the chaff somehow. And because that has given me real problems at times in the past. So if you can figure out if you need a machine that if you're going to drop straw in a windrow, you got to spread the chaff. One of the other things we're trying to kind of fine tune is basically our cover crop species, and we keep planting fewer oats every year and keep wanting to have just a kind of a thinner stand. Amber Holland said it best when she said less is more when it comes to cover crops.
Great, thanks for that input. So there was another question that came in as well, asking about the pluribus units. And the question is, if you're on a light soil, so sand or sandy loam soil, do you think you'd have more success with the Dawn pluribus? For those of you who use those units, just curious what your comments would be.
Yes, that's where when I traded mine in, and this is, well, who's going to buy those units? And says, well, we move them to people with lighter soils. That's where and I saw that on our gravel, like we have a few acres of gravel, and they work fine there. So so that's, I think you'd be fine there. And as long as the cover crop, like I think Ken mentioned, the cover crop, doesn't get too tall, so, but that was the problem. The soil warrior, it'll take 2 foot tall red clover that's not even sprayed to push that down, right? The pluribus won't do that, right? So that's the 2 key things you'd have to keep in mind with the pluribus, I think. So
yeah, my experience with the pluribus is that and Gary talked about it leaving kind of a misshapen berm or an offset berm. The deeper, generally speaking, and we run it basically as deep as we can run it in the fall. And it leaves a berm that's relatively centered. And if you're in lighter ground, I don't have any experience in like a tobacco sand, but if you're in lighter ground and you can run it deep, then I think you would be probably happier with it than somebody on some really gnarly clay.
We found with in our clays, it would we couldn't get it to. It had a limit on how deep it could penetrate. If it was a dry fall or like early start or something like that, you get 4 inches out of it. Rarely 5. Unless you ran into some really loamy ground that would go deeper. But so a lot of times we weren't able to penetrate that over that 5 inches for sure. But that's all we run our shank machine is 5 today too. So we seem to find a good berm at that, and it settles down to by spring to like almost flat to, you know, ½ inch up. And
So another question that came in, oh, sorry. So this was for the second presenter. So this is for Ken Lawton. When changing from shank to double coulters on the Coon Gladiator, how did you put your nutrients on? Did you dump them on top of the coulter or put them on after the twin coulters, or not at all? Again, in your I think it was just your spring applications with your coulter system.
We usually we dropped it in between the coulter as the soil was kind of being thrown up in the back, so it would kind of mix as it went in there.
Mixing in those double coulters.
Yeah, in between the two coulters is where we dropped it, and as the soil went up, the fertilizer went down.
And there was one more question as well for you. You have a picture planting soybeans on 15-inch rows. It looked like after stripping corn stalks. Did you strip every 15 inches, or did you leave the middles of the strips untilled?
I think the pick looked that way, but I think we're just planting corn in that, and the middles were running along empty.
Okay. So one more question again for you guys that are putting phosphorus down in the fall. Do you have any concerns about losing phosphorus out of those strips if you've strip placed MAP, or you know, getting response or phosphorus losses off the field at all in your systems?
I don't think so. It stays, phosphorus ties into the soil pretty good. So that's another reason why we don't want to go too deep either. We want to keep we don't want to hide fertilizer from our corn plant. So that's why we're running about that 5 inches, 4 to 5 inches deep on our strips with a shank machine.
Well, that's where I find the soil warrior advantageous, because it mixes it in, right? So it's it doesn't just put it at the bottom. Some of it goes to the bottom. So that's where the coulter machine maybe has a little bit of an advantage if you're concerned about that or whatever. So.
Yeah, and in my case, we're running high rates of MAP, 200 pounds of MAP in that band with the pluribus machine, and it basically mixes it all in and incorporates it. So nothing's left on the surface to speak of. Like, you can hardly find a granule. So that's where you want it, is incorporated. Sure, there's maybe some leakage out of that zone out into the adjacent soil, but as far as it running off the top of the soil or down a wormhole or something like that, because you've basically fractured the walls and everything like that, I don't think it's going anywhere.
Our MAP has been put down in the fall mostly, but we do have the ability to put the fertilizer out above the bottom or at a different level than the shank.
So you've got adjustable placement fertilizer delivery relative to shank on the Gladiator.
Yeah, we could run the shank at 6 inches and drop the fertilizer at 3, or
right.
where.
Jake, you were looking for a couple of minutes just before 8 o'clock to wrap up with your video part before we go back into kind of our last half hour. Did you want that time now, or?
Yeah, Ben, I think that'd be great timing. So I'm going to throw my video back on here, and I'm just going to pull up a few more slides. So at this point, I'm going to share a little bit of information about the Farm and Food Care Strip Till video series. And I know I'm getting a little bit of feedback. So maybe Gary, Peter, Ken, if you guys can, and maybe Ben as well, if you guys can mute, that might help the feedback. So I'm just going to share my screen again here, and we're going to attempt to share a video with you guys and see how it works. So just one moment. Okay, so as I mentioned before we started this evening, I wanted to make you all aware of a new strip till video series that's coming out very soon. It's not released yet, but basically the videos are complete. It's a 6-part series that's been shot with the growers that you can see on the screen, a couple of which you've been hearing from tonight. And you can see the list of the series there. It's meant to kind of take you from the start to the finish in terms of an overview of strip till, the different components of the system. And each video is anywhere from 4.5 to 7 minutes long. So we're really happy to have worked with Farm and Food Care as soil team members and OMAFRA staff and with these growers who brought a ton of knowledge. So I'm just going to share a 60-second trailer. We tested this ahead of time. We expect that the quality is not going to be as ideal as possible, but hopefully it gives you a sense of what these series are going to be all about. So let me just get that started here. Actually, I'm going to stop myself just for a moment. I got to make sure that I'm sharing my my computer sound, which I am. Okay, let's give it a go. Okay, so I intentionally chose the lowest quality version that I had available of that trailer in the hopes that it would transmit okay to all of you out there. I hope that you at least got a sense of what these videos are all about. And so as participants in this series of events, I will be getting in touch with you once these videos are released, and I've got all of your emails. I will send the links out to you to that video series when it comes out, which again, we expect within a number of weeks. So keep an eye out for that. I know that there's a number of CCAs who've been attending tonight. And so I guess as we approach 8 o'clock at this point, I'd like to just give you the opportunity to, and I'm just going to move my screen along here. I think I need to let the video finish. There we go. So for any of you who are CCAs, this is the chance for you to sign in for your CEU credits for taking part this evening. So you got 3 options. You can scan the QR code I'm going to leave on the screen here for about 30 seconds. That's option number 1. Option number 2, and Anne, this is your cue to add the link that I've got on the screen into the chat. So take a look in the chat for that link. For anybody who took part in breakfast meetings this summer, it's the same system that we use there. So just enter your name and your CCA number, and we'll make sure that you get your CEU credits. As a final option for anybody calling in over the phone who doesn't have access to those 2 options, please get in touch with Anne Verhollen. So her email, ann.verhollen@ontario.ca, or any number of us. If whoever is your contact at OMAFRA, let us know, and we can make sure that you get your CEU credits for this evening. So with that, I think we're at the end of our kind of formal part of the evening. I'd like to thank everybody for participating, and thank in particular the speakers, both Ken's, Gary, and Peter, for taking their time, sharing their experiences. I'd also like to thank my colleague for kind of supporting on the back end to help get this first event off. For those of you, I know that you've signed up for the series as a whole, so we're going to have our next event on this Thursday, so 2 days from now, same time, 7 to 8 p.m. And as Anne already mentioned in the chat, we're going to be talking about strip till and cover crops and how they work together, and we got another great set of speakers for that. So with that, anyone who has to go or wants to bow out at this point, please feel free. Anyone who wants to stay on, please continue to enter your questions in the chat, and I'll hand it back to Ben to kind of continue the conversation.
Thanks, Jake. And yeah, I think you mentioned I've still got a bunch of questions here to go through. I think we were going to do a hard stop at 8:30, but certainly we'll keep answering questions if we keep getting them here. So there's a good question here for growers in a corn, soybean, wheat rotation on low fertility soils. If we are putting the biggest chunk of fertilizer down in your strip till passes, how are you addressing issues like corn row syndrome in the wheat crop? Are you putting fertility down with the wheat at all to try to address that? Just curious what your thoughts are in those cases.
We haven't got enough experience with wheat. This year was the first year out of the 7 years that we've been strip tilling. The first year I strip tilled wheat ground. Cautiously watched our neighbors on wheat, and try to figure out what the do's and don't do's, and still found lots of don't do's, even though we watched other people. But don't have enough experience, but we do put, when we plant wheat, fertilizer goes on with the wheat prods, air flowed on, and we also blended wheat with our fertilizer, with our seed, and put it right down with our drill same time. So hopefully that addresses any fertilizer strip syndrome or anything of that. So still learning.
Thanks, Gary. Any comments from the other guys?
Yeah, what we do, that how I said, in the spring we split the fertilizer and we put part of it right in front of the shank. Well, we moved that to in between the row units. So in the summer, we go half goes in between. Just broadcast that on. I'm thinking maybe adding a coulter or something to get it into the ground. But anyway, at this time it's just as simple to, just blow it in the middle, I guess. And we did that originally, then went away from that, and then we actually started noticing the problem of corn row syndrome when we started strip tilling white beans, because we put that in. Yeah, so because the white beans go in the same row where the corn was 2 years ago, right? So, and we always had starter fertilizer just for the corn and just for the white beans. So that's when this corn row syndrome really was magnified. So the last couple of years we've gone back to broadcasting the fall, like when we go in the wheat stubble, we split that now too again. So
in our case, we've been running at least 100 pounds of MAP with our air seeder when we plant wheat. So that's kind of how we keep our corn row syndrome out of our wheat. Then the rest of our MAP, so we're putting on over 3 years 400 pounds MAP at least, and so the rest of our MAP will be broadcast ahead of soybeans. So essentially, we band with strip till rig for corn, we in with the seed for wheat, and broadcast in the spring ahead of planting beans, and so essentially we're dribbling phosphorus all three crops, and that's we have not yet seen an issue with strips or stratification.
Ken, Lawton, do you have any comments?
We don't really grow that much wheat, and that black clay is different every year, and we haven't seen any corn row syndrome show up. This year we planted all our wheat in twin 6-inch rows on 30-inch centers to try and leave a gap to plant corn in, to strip for corn the next year. And that's also where we had to put our MAP fertilizer when we planted the wheat. So not sure how that comes out, but find out next year.
Yeah. So this one was for Peter. Can you elaborate why you run your strips up and down the slopes instead of across the slopes, or why you thought it wasn't as much of an issue for erosion?
Yeah, actually glad somebody asked that because it's, and I didn't send the pic. I have a picture of that. When we had the first demo of the TerraForge units, and this was on soybean stubble, so no cover, very little stubble. And that was done at a right angle, but not that steep a slope. And there's a little bit of water coming off another field. And, and I don't know how much rain or snow melt we had that year. But the problem is if the berm goes at right angle to the slope, it acts like a dam, right? Like a berm, right? Holds water. And if you get too much, it tends to break. And once it breaks, you wash the whole thing out. Mine, I never really get up and down the slope. If the berm or the strip is high enough and chunky enough, it'll slow the water down. It'll direct the water to the side. And as long as you don't have that groove from the berm builders or whatever, it can't wash because, well, our fall strips are always in wheat stubble, so they help, and then now the cover crop. So to me, that's not the only time when we see a little bit washing it, just if there's maybe like a water run starting, or a little bit of a low. So, but even there, it washes the way. It doesn't really, you've never had to go back and fix anything on weeds, with a cultivator or something. So in the last, I don't know how many years, the only time I may do that, there was soybean stubble, it was a fairly big water run, but not even stripped. It was just, it washed out just the soybean stubble, right? So, but like it says, if you have wheat stubble, cover crop, and the chunky, strip in the fall, I don't see a big problem. I think you're better off up and down. I know that doesn't make sense, but it does to me, so.
Ken, I'm going to ask that question to you too. You've got some undulating complex topography. What have your observations been for fall strips and erosion?
Yeah, so Peter's dead on. I've seen I've stripped up and down hills, and the pucker factor is pretty good in the fall, thinking that this is going to be bad, and had no problems. Or had fewer problems, but he's absolutely correct. If you have a water run or a place where water is going to gather and kind of run down through a bit of a valley, crossways to your strips, do not strip through that, because, as he said, the water will kind of hit those little dams until it doesn't. And as soon as it breaks through, not only will it run through and take away your berm, but then it will also act like a venturi and suck everything out of that's been disturbed, and you'll be left with ruts, like the shape of whatever the tooth or the coulter's made. Whatever they loosened down as deep as they could, the water running across there will just suck everything out, and it'll be just really, really ugly. So our prejudice is, if we're stripping through a place where we know water is going to run, we'll pick the unit up and set it back down on the other side, and maybe plant a cover up and down that slope with a drill or something like that. But do not rip through it and disturb it.
Cool. Those are interesting comments, because it kind of goes against textbook answer would be, if you're going across the slope, you shouldn't have issues. And like you mentioned, maybe not, but once it does break, things are bad. That's kind of cool. I know Gary and Ken, you guys maybe aren't as on topography. Do you guys have any comments with erosion and fall strips at all as well, or?
We're pretty flat in the most part. Very limited areas where we have any topography or rolling ground, just small little rolls or whatever. So fall is best for us. And then, like I say, it's rare to see a blowout berm.
We're pretty flat here too, and never seen any erosion effects from the side of the strip.
Good. So the next question is going to spring fertility. Any concerns on spring strips with trying to push fertilizer, particularly ones we're concerned about nitrogen, potassium, and sulfur? And also, how deep are you placing fertilizer in a spring strip scenario? So for anybody who's putting on or has experience putting on fertility in the spring with their strip tillers.
When we were in the service system, we did run a fall pass for the first 2 years, and the spring pass with a starter, map starter, didn't see a problem. We just could not make a good enough strip, even like touching the soil in the spring. Best just to leave it alone in our soils. Make a good strip in the fall, and just plant into a nice, mellow, uniform strip.
So I've had a couple of experiences with what I refer to as Plan B. So that is spring strips into wheat stubble, preparing for corn when we couldn't get strips made in the fall. And we have backed away from 200 of each down to 150 a MAP, 150 a potash. I also had a situation this year with corn on corn, where we did a bunch of that, trying to get our rotation squirreled back because we lost some wheat here a couple of years ago. And our recipe, so this is with a pluribus, shallowed out a little bit, but not too much. So there's still a pretty big zone there we're blending it into, and it's not banded, it's blended through the entire zone. And our recipe this year was 120 pounds of MAP, 120 pounds of potash, and 60 pounds of ammonium sulfate. So somebody can run the numbers on that to figure out what the NPKs is on it, but 120 MAP, 120 potash, and 60 pounds of ammonium sulfate. And I had some of the sexiest looking corn that I've grown in a long time.
Yeah, we've just put ours on with the coulters so far, except for a few acres last spring that went 5 inches, but we have the ability to bring our shanks up to a 3-inch depth this year, and we're going to try that on a few more fields.
Yeah, like I've mentioned before, we did have issues when we got the shank units there 3 years ago, and we're putting on 50 pounds of urea, 50 pounds of N, and a big chunk of that is urea, and about 15 pounds of potash. And so we did see some burn there, but that's why we're splitting that. But then sometimes we run like 3 inches, so we're almost basically putting the fertilizer, right almost where the seed is. So that's, did create some problems. Now, as a guideline, I use the 2x2 band that OMAF has for the planter. And I think urea and potash is 90 pounds, what you can put on that. We've never gone above that. And it's not a big issue with the soil warrior because it gets blended in, but on the shank, we had to kind of split that, and, half of it gets blended in, and that seems to solve the problem, especially when we run shallow. So.
Yeah, so that's a good point, Peter. As you mentioned, obviously safe rate's going to depend a lot on where that fertilizer is going, depth-wise, if we're banding or if we're mixing versus banding in that strip as well. Kind of complicates things a little bit.
Yeah, it does. So, but anyway, that's why I said you'll keep, because we used to only have 35 pounds of nitrogen in our spring mix. We had more potash, so but I noticed sometimes we run out of nitrogen if we get side dressing too late. So that's when we took some potash out and put a bit more urea or ammonium sulfate in that mix too. And so, okay.
So next question is going to GPS and guidance. So the question was, what GPS system is everybody using? Any issues with RTK failing or not being accurate enough to stay on the strips? And I guess I'll add another one on top of that too. In terms of keeping the planter on strips as well, any issues there, from a draft perspective or just keeping things centered?
We run an RTK, John Deere RTK system. We run machine guidance, so our machine, like the planter, we run a 24-row planter that's got the beacon on it. It tells the tractor where to go, and we've never had trouble staying on a strip. We run both the same guidance systems on the strip tiller unit as we do on the planter, so it's never an issue staying on, and our ground's flat enough. We don't have that ability to drift or anything of that, so seems to work fine.
Yeah, we run egg leader yeah, we're all egg leader equipment and everything's RTK, but we don't have implement guidance, and it's not a big deal. I guess with our slopes and stuff, you know, it's not a big deal. As long as you go the same direction, you know, the way you strip, that's the way the planter goes. Because if there is a bit of, you know, and the side hills, you know, we do have some drifting, but then the planter will drift the same roughly. I find yeah, we don't, no, it's not a big problem, I find. So as long as, you know, both machines, you know, have the same equipment, that's probably the main criteria. And probably having matching like a 12-row strip tiller with a 12-row planter, probably, in case your gas row does go off a little bit, then you know, you don't have that issue because if they move the same.
We also use the Green Star from John Deere, and I think everything pulls really straight with it. Sometimes you run into a seed corn picker track with one side of the strip tiller, and that will maybe push it off an inch or so. But it's by the time you go through in the spring, things end up being straighter on the strip that you're going to plant on anyway. So it's not a problem.
We run Trimble equipment. It's RTK. Our strip till rig is semi-mount, so basically where the tractor goes, the strips are set. But our planter is a pull type, so both 12-row units. So that's helpful. We're never straddling a guest row. By and large, and actually probably for a decade, we just hand steered our planter down our strips, and especially once we went to the coulter style strip till rig, we just found the planter followed our strips a whole lot better than when we were trying to keep it up on top of that berm made with a shank machine. That was our experience. Nowadays we run our TK guidance as well on our planter tractor, and that's takes a lot of the stress out of things. It's not essential to have guidance on your planter tractor, I don't think, but it really, really is nice.
So next question is asking about row widths. Anybody have experience stripping less than 30-inch rows? In this case, they're asking if anybody's done stripping on 15-inch rows.
No, we haven't. We've always stripped on 30-inch. We used to have twin row planter 15 years ago. We tried to make the strip wide enough to have a twin row plant, twin 30s. That's all we have done. But at that time, I just couldn't get the strip to make. I had a homemade machine, a different one at the time. So, but we gave up on that. So
The narrowest we have in our neighborhood is 20. A fellow that we've got a couple guys that strip at 20 inches, and they have their challenges, but it seems to be working for them. I've never seen 15s. I'd like to. We plant soybeans at 15s. I'd like to be able to strip for soybeans. And we don't dare to go to 30s. So on soybeans, so corn's at 30s, soybeans at 15. But there are people in this area that grow at 20s, both corn and soybeans.
Gary, do you you said you got guys stripping in 20s? Are they stripping into wheat stubble, or is that always soybean stubble?
No, cover crops, wheat stubble, and soybean stubble.
Okay. I think there's certain machines, and I think maybe a Warrior might, because kind of that rolling style might be one of the machines you can do that with. I guess our experience, especially in, with heavy covers and 100+ bushel wheat stubble with the straw spread, not harvested, you need a fair bit of real estate to flip all that stuff out of the zone. And I've struggled at times even in 30s, and I just shudder to think what it'd be like down in 20s. There's probably machines that can do it, but that's a lot of stuff you got to move, and not a lot of place to put it.
I'm with you on that. Even at 30s, there's a lot of material to move. like on a big bean crop, on 60 bushel bean crop, and you've also got residue down there from 2 years prior corn. We strip right back on top of our corn row typically, so we're moving that residue as well as you know, a bean crop. So there's in 30s there's a lot of residue to move.
So next question is asking about planting 15-inch soybeans after strip tilling on 30. Is there any impacts or things that you do differently in that scenario, being a strip tiller, if you weren't a strip tiller?
We didn't change anything. We just our soybean rows go 7.5 inches to the side of a corn row, so the planter unit's not running on, it's just running adjacent to the corn row. And the soybeans can utilize the fertilizer, leftover fertilizer that's in that zone. That's our system.
Any comments from Ken or Peter?
Well, we twin row our soybeans, right? So, no, can't comment, I guess, regarding 15-inch. I mean, that's what we used to do, but anyway, then we built the twin row planter. Like we used to drill them in 15-inch, but then we built the twin row planter for the white beans. I really like that twin row planter on the strip. So now we just stripped, you know, just no-till with the planter and twin rows. So, which is nice because you're staying away from the corn row as far as, you know, depth control, you know, so we like that better. So the only thing is you're going right where probably most of the compaction is, you know, where the tire tracks are, you know, so that's maybe a bit of a downfall, I guess, for twin rowing your soybeans, I guess, maybe, but I guess we'll can't have everything is my motto, so give and take.
Our experience with soybeans is we haven't planted in 15s. We're still in solid seeded with an air seeder is how we plant our soybeans into our corn stalks. And other than the row up adjacent to the root ball, trying to get good seed to soil contact on it, we don't. I'm not sure what the question meant or what was the situation, but things are good.
We just started plant with the twin row air seeder for soybeans this year. We still do some 30s and 15s on the clay. Only have the 1 year experience with the twins.
Thanks, Ken. So I think the last question we'll end up with, we're getting close to 8:30 here, is a question about fertility blends. So in this case, grower was putting down, so spring stripping a mix of micros and ammonia sulfate, and they're having issues with meters plugging up. They were told to go towards more urea instead of the ammonia sulfate. Any experience running ammonia sulfate in blends and having issues with fertilizer flow on strip tillers?
We have never had an issue at all with ammonium sulfate in our mix. Now, I can't tell you offhand how much we have in there, but the key to use, I find, is maize. That'll give us our zinc and sulfur, or some of it as well. So we don't need as much ammonium sulfate, and yeah, so and then potash, I guess, and urea makes up the rest. So the only time I had an issue quite a few years ago, and that was because water or something, you know, was not fertilizer related, was, you know, something got damp, and so that's the only time I ever had a plugging issue on my air card was, well, somehow I'm not sure where that stuff came from. So that's not a big problem. I know a neighbor who started strip tilling a few years ago now, I guess, and he called me and they were making the same mix as I had, but they were using zinc, you know, the stuff you buy in the bags or whatever, you know, and he was probably using more ammonium sulfate. So he wasn't using maize in his mix, and he had quite a few issues, especially when humidity got higher. So the key is to use the maize, and that seems to help a lot, I find, anyway, or we've never had any issues.
we've used the Mez as well and had no issues.
Yeah, we're just strictly fall, Nez. Our rates get up pretty high. We're 435 pounds through our fall planter or fall strips. So very rare to have anything bridge or plugging problems, only if there's maybe a chunk of hard stuff that comes out of the blender. But no, you can put up to 500 pounds through those units and not have any issues.
So Ben, I was saying that this past spring we run, you know, a blend that had, it was 20% ammonium sulfate by volume, or well, by weight actually, and with MAP and potash. We didn't have any problem, but I specifically chose my supplier based on the quality of their AMS. And you can get some pretty gnarly stuff. I've hauled some of that crap, and this was a better quality AMS, and it flowed well and had zero problems.
And when you say quality, Ken, just not getting dusty or like breaking down?
I've hauled AMS out of steel mills and stuff like that, which is almost wringing wet. It's hardly a granule. It's really damp, and it's probably drawing water. So the stuff I got this year was a better quality product, probably out of a different process, and was not as water seeking or water loving as some of the stuff I have seen. So the problem is you get suppliers that maybe have stuff in that will work really well through and go through a spreader with a chain and out to a set of spinners. But make sure they know, if you want AMS, make sure they know it's going to go through like a cart with a meter or a corn planter, and they may either decide to take it to Mez or steer you away from the product altogether.
Okay, interesting.
We've only ever used Mez, so Mez is a pretty clean product.
Ken Lawton, did you have any last comments on that? Or maybe you already answered.
Yeah, the Mez was pretty good from our experience, but I guess it's not as much as other speakers.
Good. So I think that gets most of our questions answered. I apologize. There's maybe a couple we didn't get to in time here. Again, to reiterate, I think it was posted in the comments that these will be, this was recorded, so it will be posted eventually once this is done. So if you're keeping notes or you didn't catch something earlier on, I think there is the ability to go back with that. But I'll send it back to Jake, and maybe Jake can have some final comments and some comments about the last or the next upcoming sessions as well.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. So just thanks to everybody who stuck around here for the last half hour. That's fantastic, and got a chance to hear some more details from Gary, Ken, and Peter. And with that, we'll just remind everybody of the upcoming event, which is Thursday, 2 days from now. Again, 7 to 8:30 p.m. and that's on strip till and cover crops. And then, as Ann mentioned in the chat, next Tuesday will be our third and final event, and that's going to deal with strip till and fertility, both fertilizer and manure. So again, thanks to all the speakers. Really appreciate you guys taking the time out of your schedules tonight to share your experiences. And with that, we'll say good night. Take care, everybody.
Good night, and thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.